Paul Benowitz was led to believe that there was a secret underground base located near Dulce, New Mexico. He began flying there in his plane to check out the area.
Eventually what happened was they began to mess with him, and some extraterrestrials, a group of grey extraterrestrials that were working with the military in the Dulce base. Benowitz's radio equipment had been able to intercept the communications between the extraterrestrials and the human operators in the base, in the underground base. So Dulce becomes a point of focus for Benowitz, and he trains his equipment there, and he has some high-speed photographic equipment there as well. And he's actually able to photograph some of the ships, some of the UFOs going into the mesa, where you actually have a kind of vibrational shift in some of the craft.
And the more he dug into it, he found himself exposed to even more nightmarish stories, many of them coming from Dulce. For example, a lot of these insiders, whistleblowers if you like, claimed to him that all sorts of unspeakable experiments were being undertaken in the Dulce base. People were being used as guinea pigs, if you like, in bizarre genetic experiments, splicing alien and human DNA together and creating strange half-human, half-alien creatures. And reportedly there were hundreds and hundreds of people kept in the Dulce base in cages, you know, the people who go missing every year, that kind of thing.
So Benowitz did strongly believe that there was an underground base at Dulce, New Mexico. I don't think he was necessarily far off, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't necessarily discredit what Benowitz thinks. I think it's entirely possible that there was and may even still be some underground activity near Dulce. First of all, just generally speaking, it is documented and known that no later than the 1960s did the United States Navy have detailed plans to build deep underground facilities, deep underground military bases, D.U.M.s, in various parts of the United States and globally. And that not just under the ground, but under the ocean floor. We have illustrations, drawings of this at the time by illustrators who were hired by the Navy to do this. Now, whether they did it or not is another question, but certainly they were thinking about this. And by the way, the expense, the money, the technology, all of that was totally doable in the context of 1960s. So it could be done. All you need to do for an underground ocean base is extract oxygen out of the water. And we know how to do that. We've done that since the 50s. Have a source of energy down there and you can play ping pong and under nice fluorescent lighting for days and weeks and months. No problem. Underground bases are not difficult. Underground bases under the mountains, ditto.
In northern New Mexico, animals were being found drained of blood with organs removed. Black helicopters were seen flying around the area, strange lights, UFOs, and it all revolved around this huge mesa which overlooks Dulce, called the Archuleta Mesa. One of the intriguing theories is that there exists within and below this huge mesa some sort of fortified alien installation, an extraterrestrial base, if you like. And certainly since the 1970s, right through to the present day, a lot of research has been done into the Dulce area to try and answer that question. Are extraterrestrials living under New Mexico in the Dulce area?
Yeah, back in the 1950s in Farmington, there was an armada of UFOs seen going from Farmington eastward towards Dulce. Terrified everybody, made the newspapers, and then nothing.
In today's world, a lot of nations do have underground installations, and it makes a great deal of sense because if, God forbid, there was ever a nuclear war, then if some sort of containment of government is going to take place and continuation, then the best place to be in a Third World War is underground. It makes sense. So a lot of these installations were built during the height of the Cold War to protect the governments, while unfortunately the rest of us are left upstairs to fry. And one of the theories is that some of these installations may have been built for potentials in the event of a Third World War, but over time they may have been reorganized and transformed to where you have these alien-human interactions going on. In other words, very much like Dulce.
We had people coming forward, finally sharing UFO sightings, engagements with cryptids, creatures they could not explain. For the first time on record, multiple families, independent of one another, said they hear traffic beneath their town. Traffic like cars and trucks. They hear like what sounds like a train system. And we all know about the maglev tunnel system that supposedly exists there. There is one that exists within the Los Alamos infrastructure. It's an underground maglev system.
What's interesting about Dulce itself is that back in 1967, there was a program called Operation Gas Buggy, and ostensibly it was to detonate atomic bombs underground in the Dulce area to try and extract natural gas. Now, some researchers believe that that was a cover story and the nuclear blasting was actually done to expand the Dulce base, or even to try and wipe out the hostile aliens that were down there. In other words, we have this situation where, according to Phil Schneider, the Dulce base was almost like a nightmarish Frankenstein's type lab.
The small town of Dulce always experienced a lot of high strangeness. However, in the mid-1990s, a man came forth with a stunning story about his experiences in an underground base built under the Archuleta Mesa, just north of Dulce. His name was Phil Schneider.
Phil Schneider, he started going public in the mid-1990s, and he started attending some UFO conferences and started to reveal his background as a civil engineer. He showed his documentation that he was the son of an Operation Paperclip scientist, and that he was recruited into these covert programs. It tends to be a kind of generational thing, so he just followed his father's footsteps, building these underground bases that would be joint facilities for extraterrestrials and elite human units. So he's building these bases all over the place. He's part of the team that kind of like is looking at different areas that would be suitable for the construction of a base. And he described a number of incidents. One of the incidents happened in 1979, the famous Dulce battle, where he says that they sunk a shaft. They were basically doing some mining exploration there to see where they could build a facility in that arena, and they basically came into an area that was a very old cavern system where grey extraterrestrials had a base. And the story was that what happened was that there were elite military units that went down there, Delta Forces and other special forces, SEALs and so forth, went down there, and they basically encountered these tall grey extraterrestrials. And so there was a firefight down there, and approximately 60 military personnel and scientists were killed. And Schneider gets wounded, but he's alive and he gets extracted out of there. So that's the famous Dulce battle, which was basically where the US military went into an area where they weren't supposed to be.
His version of events is that there was an altercation there. He was involved in the altercation. He was hit with some sort of a plasma weapon which seared off a portion of his hand, and that he had managed to escape with samples, synthetic samples that were synthesized by the Greys that essentially led to the development of our stealth technology. He was displaying these at conferences as part of these preparedness expos. He had this whole connection to aliens, essentially, and for him the catalyst was his time at Dulce, and it was this 1979 engagement with the Greys, and that's pretty much the crux of his story. And as you know, he went on the lecture circuit and died as a result.
Phil Schneider was an interesting character who's now deceased. His father was a man named Oscar Schneider, who had a lot of responsibility during the Second World War. He was involved in early atomic bomb tests, worked on nuclear submarines, and according to Phil Schneider, his father also worked on the infamous Philadelphia experiment in 1943, which was allegedly a program to try and make a warship invisible to the enemy. But as far as Phil Schneider's concerned, he came forward many years ago now, talking about how he said he was an engineer and was working on a lot of programs to construct massive underground installations all across the United States.
And so Schneider began in the mid-1990s talking about the Dulce battle, talking about his involvement in building these underground bases. He said that there were just over 100 of them all over the United States, that there were some in other places of the world like Pine Gap in Australia. He disclosed the size of the budget, of the black budget, and his estimate was pretty accurate. He said back in that day, he said it was around $1 trillion. So he's talking about the early 1990s, and it was funding all of these bases. And he broke ranks when he realized that what was being created was a new world government. That he saw a facility that was being created that would host the United Nations. And he said that what greatly disturbed him was that where the United Nations diplomats would be meeting and conducting their business for the planet, that above them was a kind of alcove where the grey extraterrestrials would be observing. And he realized that the New World Order was basically going to be controlled by these grey extraterrestrials who were working with the German groups out of Antarctica. And so this was something that he decided that he couldn't go along with this. He would reveal the truth, and that's what he was doing right up until early 1996. He turns up dead in his apartment, strangled. An autopsy isn't really conducted, and people start disclosing that this is exactly what he had been warning against, that he would be assassinated for revealing all this information. And it was made to look like a suicide, but the people who knew him and know about the circumstances, the lack of a rigorous autopsy, that Schneider had been murdered for revealing too much.